The wind tore at her skirts and whipped her hair into a wild halo as Margot Hollister dangled perilously above the jagged canyon floor, the coarse rope cutting into her raw wrists. Below, the red rocks glistened in the relentless sun, jagged, teeth of the earth threatening to swallow her in an instant. A small crowd of townsfolk leaned over the flimsy wooden railing of the cliff's edge, their faces twisted with cruel anticipation. Some cheered, others whispered bets. Margot's chest tightened and a cold knot of fear settled deep in her stomach. She had faced adversity before, but nothing like this. "Hold still, lady, or it's all over," sneered one of the men, his voice rough with drunken bravado. The rope swayed dangerously as he leaned closer, eyes gleaming with malice. Margot's mind raced. Escape seemed impossible. The townspeople were too close, the rope frayed in places. Her vision blurred as tears of fear and fury stung her eyes. Then, from the canyon wall above, a shadow detached itself from the sunlit rocks. Margot froze mid-breath. The figure was impossibly large, moving with predatory grace. Long black hair cascaded down his shoulders, glinting with strands of beads and feathers. His chest was bare, muscles taut and glistening, each movement deliberate, controlled. Tribal jewelry adorned his wrists and neck, and the intensity in his dark eyes fixed on her like a predator assessing its prey. Yet, there was no cruelty in those eyes, only focus and something protective. Time seemed to stretch. The men below didn't notice the figure above at first, their attention too, consumed by the imminent humiliation. Margot's heart thumped violently, a drumbeat against the cliff's sharp silence. The stranger moved, and suddenly she realized he was descending, leaping from rock to rock with impossible agility. Her breath hitched. Could he be trying to help her? "Koyin," he murmured softly, the name strange and foreign, but spoken with reverence. The wind carried his words faintly, almost a whisper. One of the men, sensing something amiss, turned just as Koyin landed silently behind him. His eyes widened in shock, mouth opening to scream, but Koyin's hand shot out, a blur of motion. In one swift motion, the rope around Margot's wrists was severed, and she collapsed into Koyin's arms, the world spinning around her. "Easy, easy," he murmured, his voice low, steady. Margot's heart still pounded against her chest, but she clung to him, feeling the raw strength in his arms. The townsfolk recoiled, fear replacing their cruel amusement. For the first time, Margot felt something she hadn't felt in months' safety. But it was tenuous, fragile, and temporary. Koyin's dark eyes scanned the crowd. His expression hardened. "Leave," he said, and the words carried a weight of command that brooked no argument. The men hesitated, glancing at one another then. One by one, they slunk away, muttering threats they would never act on. Margot's knees weakened, and she sank to the dusty ground of the cliff's narrow ledge. She pressed a hand to her trembling chest, her eyes wide, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. The desert sun burned her skin, the wind whipped her hair into tangles, and dust clung to her sweaty cheeks. Yet amid the chaos she felt a strange, tentative calm. You saved me," she whispered, voice hoarse, almost disbelieving. Koyin did not answer immediately. He extended a hand, helping her to her feet. "Danger is not over," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, but there was a softness underneath. An unspoken understanding. They will return. You cannot go back to them, not yet. Margot studied him, his stoic presence, the quiet power in every motion. She wanted to ask why he helped her, why he risked himself, but words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, knowing that in this moment, trust had to precede explanation. Together they turned to face the canyon, its sprawling expanse both treacherous and magnificent. Margot's heart still raced, but a spark of something Unnameable hope, perhaps, or resolve kindled in her chest. She had survived, but the real journey, the true test of courage and wit, had only just begun. Margot Hollister's legs shook as she clung to Coyne's strong arms, the rush of adrenaline from the cliffside rescue still thrumming through her veins. The canyon below was a jagged abyss, but above them the wind had softened, carrying the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. Coyne's dark eyes scanned the narrow ledges with methodical precision, every step measured, his long black hair whipping in the breeze like a shadow trailing him. Margot could only follow, trying not to think about the men she had left cowering. Below, men who would return with vengeance in their hearts. They moved through a narrow fissure in the rocks, and Margot blinked in disbelief. Before them lay a hidden valley, tucked between canyon walls like a secret kept by the earth itself. Sunlight spilled onto a carpet of green wildflowers, sparkling dew dripping from ferns and mosses that grew impossibly in this desert. A clear spring gurgled nearby, its water reflecting the sky like a shard of liquid sapphire. Birds darted between twisted oaks and shrubs, chirping warnings at the intruders. It was a paradise, untouched, and yet Margot felt the weight of danger pressing at the edges of its beauty. "You brought me here," she said, her voice trembling, though whether from fear or awe she could not tell. Coyne said nothing at first. He only stood still, muscles taut, eyes sweeping the perimeter. Finally, he nodded. "Safe for now," he said, his deep voice calm but firm. "They will search. They will return. Here, they cannot follow without risk." Margot sank to the ground, letting the soft grass cushion her bruised wrists. She studied him carefully. His skin was bronzed, glistening in the sunlight. His chest rose and fell steadily despite the adrenaline of the rescue. Beads and feathers in his hair rattled softly as he moved, a subtle rhythm she had not noticed before. There was danger in every motion he took, and yet also control, precision, a quiet authority that unsettled and reassured her simultaneously. I don't understand why you're helping me," Margot admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not part of your world." Coyne's gaze softened just slightly, a hint of something unspoken passing between them. "It is not about your world, Margot Hollister. It is about respect and injustice," he said. He crouched near the spring, cupping his hands to drink. The water rippled, reflecting his intense eyes. Some wrongs must be prevented. Margot swallowed hard. She had always been independent, proud, and yet today she had clung to a stranger's arm for her very life. Her pride screamed at her, but the raw reality of survival pressed it down. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Then, "What do we do now?" Coyne's eyes swept the valley again. "We wait, and we prepare." For the next hour, he taught her how to move silently along the rocks, how to listen to the whisper of the wind, how to spot danger before it could reach them. Margot's muscles ached, her fingers blistered from gripping rough stones, but she followed, absorbing every lesson. Despite the strain, a sense of purpose settled over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her husband's death, since the town's betrayal of her family's land dot as the sun dipped lower, painting the valley in gold and shadow. Margot allowed herself a moment to breathe. The spring glistened beside them, the scent of wild sage filling the air. She could feel Coyne's eyes on her, watching, assessing not with threat, but with vigilance. She realized, with a mixture of awe and trepidation, that he had saved her not only from the cliff, but from a life of helplessness. Suddenly, movement at the far edge of the valley caught her eye. Margot froze. Coyne's hand went to her shoulder. A silent command. Through the thinning light, shadows flickered, figures moving toward them, but not as recklessly as before. The attackers had returned, braving the treacherous climb, their eyes set on her once more. Coyne stood tall, his stance wide and unyielding, the valley around them framing him like a guardian spirit. Margot's fear surged, but she no longer felt powerless. She had learned, even in a few short hours, that survival was not merely about running. It was about readiness, courage, and trust. And in that moment, trust was something she was beginning to feel, even for a man whose world she barely understood. The sun slipped behind the cliffs, the valley turning amber and shadow. Margot drew in a shuddering breath. Whatever came next, she would face it not as a victim, but as someone ready to fight. And at her side, Koyen's presence was both a shield and a silent promise. She would not face the danger alone. The night in the hidden valley was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the ears until every sound feels magnified. Margot Hollister crouched near the sparkling spring, her fingers brushing the cool water as she tried to steady her racing heart. Koyen sat nearby, cross-legged, his dark eyes scanning the shadowed canyon edges. The flickering light from a small fire reflected on his bronzed chest, glinting off the beads and feathers woven into his long black hair. His presence was both comforting and intimidating, a silent promise that he would defend her against anything that approached. Margot's gaze drifted to the dark silhouettes of the cliffs surrounding them. She had hoped, foolishly, that the night would pass without incident. But the wind carried the faintest whispers metal against leather, soft footfalls on stone. Her stomach clenched. She knew instinctively they had come. Koyen's hand rested on the hilt of a curved knife, the movement so subtle she almost missed it. His posture shifted, muscles coiling like a predator preparing to strike. He didn't speak. There was no need. Margot understood. She could either run blindly or trust him completely. She chose the latter. From the shadowed ridge above, masked figures emerged, moving cautiously but with deadly intent. The men who had tried to trap her on the cliff had returned, braving the treacherous canyon paths, their eyes fixed on Margot's slight form. She froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. One of the attackers crept closer to the spring, unaware that Koyen had already disappeared into the shadows. Margot barely had time to gasp as a blur of motion struck from the darkness. Koyen landed silently behind the man, his knife flashing in the firelight. In a single fluid motion, he disarmed him and sent him sprawling into the shallow creek. Margot's breath caught in awe and terror. "Stay low," Koyen whispered, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried authority over the chaos. Margot pressed herself against the grass, eyes wide, trying to make sense of the rapid flurry of motion. Koyen moved like a storm incarnate, each strike precise, every dodge calculated. The attackers were skilled, but they had never faced anyone like him. Within moments, several lay groaning in the dust, disarmed and humiliated. Despite the adrenaline and fear, Margot could not tear her eyes from him. Koyen's bare chest glistened with sweat, his long black hair plastered against his skin as he moved with an almost unnatural grace. The beads and feathers in his hair rattled softly, a strange rhythm amid the chaos. She realized with a mixture of fascination and apprehension that he was not just powerful, he was disciplined, fearless and utterly in control. The fight ended as quickly as it began. The remaining attackers scrambled back toward the cliffs, some limping, others cursing under their breath. Koyen did not pursue them. He turned his gaze to Margot, who was trembling, her clothes dirt-streaked, hair tangled, but alive. "You are safe," he said, kneeling beside her. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. "For now they will come again, but they will hesitate." Margot blinked, trying to collect herself. She had survived another attack, yet her chest ached, not just from fear, but from the strange, undeniable awareness of the man beside her. Koyen's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, but filled with something she could not yet name: respect. vigilance, perhaps even understanding. I don't understand how you do that, she whispered, voice trembling. It's like you're a part of the shadows themselves. Koyan's lips curved into a brief, almost imperceptible smile. The shadows are only dangerous if you do not respect them, he said, standing tall. The firelight danced over his bronze skin and tribal jewelry, highlighting the power in every line of his body. Margot exhaled, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The hidden valley, which had seemed so serene in daylight, now felt like a fragile sanctuary. Danger lurked in every shadow, but for the first time, she sensed she was not completely alone. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Margot allowed herself a small, cautious hope. She had faced death, betrayal, and fear, yet she had survived. And at her side, Koyan remained a silent, watchful guardian whose very presence promised that perhaps the valley's secrets could shelter them both, if only for a little while. The flickering firelight inside the cliffside alcove painted long shadows on the rough stone walls. Margot Hollister sat cross-legged, her knees aching from hours of travel and tension, but her eyes were wide and alert. Koyan had set up a small fire, the flames crackling and sending sparks into the night air. The hidden alcove smelled of warm earth and smoke, a strange comfort amid the wilderness that had become her temporary refuge. Koyan crouched nearby, meticulously sharpening the curved blade he always carried. The rhythmic scrape of metal against stone was almost hypnotic, and Margot found herself watching him, trying to decipher the silent language of his movements. There was a precision, a discipline, and yet a quiet melancholy that lingered behind his intense dark eyes. After a long pause, Margot finally spoke, her voice soft. Koyan, you've protected me, twice now. I don't even know your story. Why do you fight like this? Why risk yourself for someone you don't even know? Koyan's hands stilled, the whetstone hovering over the blade. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers, deep and unreadable. You are not the first to be threatened, Margot Hollister, and I am not the first to have lost what I loved. Margot leaned forward, curiosity tinged with caution. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly, as though weighing how much to reveal. My people, my tribe, we were forced from our lands. Settlers came with fire and greed. Families torn apart. Children lost. I lost my family. His voice, though low, carried the weight of decades of grief. The beads and feathers in his hair shook slightly as he lowered his head, a rare crack. In his stoic demeanor, Margot's throat tightened. She had lived a life of grief herself. The sudden death of her husband had left her reeling, and the threats to her family's land felt like a fresh wound. I understand loss, she said quietly, almost to herself. I lost my husband last year. And now the town, the men who plotted against me. I feel like I'm losing everything again. For a moment, silence hung between them. The fire sputtered, shadows dancing across the stone. Koyan finally spoke again, his tone gentler, almost a whisper. Loss shapes us. It teaches us to survive, to protect, to be vigilant. It is why I watch over you. Not for yourself alone, but for the principle, for the right of the innocent to live without fear. Margot swallowed hard, her chest tight. There was a vulnerability in his words, a raw honesty she had not expected. And in that moment, she felt an odd kinship with him, two souls marked by suffering, both forced to navigate a world that often showed no mercy. I never expected to meet someone like you, she admitted, her voice trembling. Strong, fearless, and yet human. Koyan's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Strength without humanity is nothing. You will learn that. His dark eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, Margot glimpsed the man beneath. The warrior, the man shaped by pain, by survival, by loyalty. She shifted closer to the fire, letting its warmth chase away the chill that had settled in her bones. "Do you ever regret the path you've taken?" she asked. He looked into the flames, his gaze distant. "Regret is for those who survive without purpose. I have purpose. You have found yourself in danger, yet still you persist. That is strength." Margot exhaled, feeling the tension in her body ease just slightly. The valley outside seemed miles away, the dangers of the cliffs momentarily forgotten. In the flickering firelight, she allowed herself to imagine a world where survival didn't feel like an endless struggle, where trust could exist, however. Tentatively, Koyen's eyes returned to her, dark and unwavering. "Tomorrow, we move. We must stay ahead of those who seek to harm you. But tonight, rest. Gather your strength. You will need it." Margot nodded, letting herself lean back against the cool stone wall. For the first time in days, the weight in her chest lightened, not completely gone, but softened by the presence of the man beside her. And for the first time, she felt the fragile stirrings of trust. A thread of hope weaving through the shadows of their shared danger. The fire crackled. The night stretched on, and in the heart of the hidden alcove, two souls bound by circumstance. And survival rested, preparing for whatever the dawn would bring. The first rumbles of thunder rolled over the canyon like distant war drums, and Margot Hollister pressed herself against a jagged rock, shivering not entirely from the chill. Rain began as a light mist, almost imperceptible, before growing into a relentless downpour that pounded the hidden valley with the intensity of the desert itself. Margot's skirts clung to her legs, soaked and heavy, hair plastered to her face. The wind lashed against her, whipping rain into her eyes, blinding her momentarily. Koyen moved beside her, bare-chested, glistening with rain and sweat, the tribal beads and feathers in his hair swaying wildly. His muscles flexed with each step, every motion purposeful as he scanned the treacherous terrain ahead. Margot could barely keep up, her heart pounding in her chest. The valley that had seemed a sanctuary now threatened to become a trap. "Stay close," Koyen shouted over the roar of the storm, his voice a commanding anchor amid chaos. Margot nodded, gripping his arm as they navigated the slippery stones and rushing rivulets of water. The canyon floor had begun to flood in places, turning familiar paths into treacherous torrents. Every step was a gamble, one slip away from injury or worse. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley in stark white. In that flash, Margot saw the intensity in Koyen's eyes, the unwavering determination etched into his face. She realized he was not merely guiding her through the storm, he was protecting her, every instinct and reflex tuned to her safety. A sudden crash of thunder shook the cliffs, and a tree, loosened by the saturated soil, toppled across their path. Margot froze, panic threatening to overwhelm her. Koyen's hand shot out, gripping her arm with a strength that was both gentle and unyielding. "Move," he commanded, pulling her out of the way just as the massive trunk slammed down where they had stood moments before. Her lungs burned, but she drew in a shaky breath and followed him. I don't know how you do this," she gasped, voice barely audible over the storm. You make it seem so effortless." Koyen's lips pressed into a thin line, not a smile, but a brief acknowledgement of her words. "Experience," he said simply, "and focus. Survival is not chance, it is action." The rain soaked them to the bone, turning Koyen's bronze skin into a slick, shining armor. Margot couldn't help but notice the raw power in his movements. Sheer strength it took to guide both of them through the torrent. Every motion seemed choreographed, precise, almost like the storm itself obeyed his commands. She felt a strange mix of fear, awe, and admiration, her pulse hammering in rhythm with the thunder above. At the canyon's narrowest pass, floodwaters surged higher, a wall of rushing water threatening to sweep them off their feet. Margot's heart leapt into her throat. Koyan gritted his teeth, his muscles taut, and reached for her. With a surge of strength, he lifted her over the worst of the current, his body slick with rain, droplets cascading like falling jewels. She clung to him, breathless, trusting entirely in his skill and strength. Once safely on firmer ground, they sank to their knees, drenched, exhausted, but alive. Lightning illuminated the valley again, and Margot found herself staring at Koyan, her mind struggling to reconcile the man who could move like a force of nature with the one who had gently steadied her moments ago. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Koyan shook his head, droplets flying from his hair. "Survival requires no thanks. It requires vigilance and trust." His eyes softened briefly, and Margot felt that subtle connection deepen. She realized she trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. The storm began to abate, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. The valley, battered but resilient, seemed to sigh with relief. Margot wiped her face, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel a cautious sense of accomplishment. She had survived the storm, and more importantly, she had survived it with Koyan at her side. As the clouds began to break, revealing shards of moonlight, Margot realized something profound. She was no longer merely a woman running from danger. She was learning to endure, to fight, to trust, and to live in a world where even the fiercest storm could not break her spirit. Margot Hollister's boots crunched over the dry, dusty streets of her hometown, each step a mixture of determination and unease. The town that had once seemed familiar now felt like a maze of judgment and hostility. Boarded windows reflected the harsh afternoon sun, and the occasional shadow of a curious townsfolk made her pulse quicken. At her side, Koyan moved silently, his bare chest glistening in the sunlight, long black hair falling over his shoulders, beads and feathers swaying with each step. His presence was commanding, and Margot felt both safe and oddly empowered simply by having him beside her. "Remember," Koyan murmured, his voice low, almost a growl, "our goal is not bloodshed. Show strength, but avoid unnecessary harm." Margot nodded, tightening her grip on the leather satchel that contained the land deeds her family had fought to keep. For months, these documents had been the target of greedy townsmen, men who had thought her vulnerable after her husband's death. Now, with Koyan's strength and strategy, she felt the weight of fear lifting, replaced by a newfound resolve. As they approached the main square, whispers spread like wildfire. Townsfolk peeked from behind barrels and shuttered windows, eyes wide with a mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. The men who had threatened her previously stood near the sheriff's office, smirks plastered on their faces as if they still held control. "You're bold," one of them sneered. "Bringing that savage here to your little showdown won't save you, Margot." Koyan's gaze darkened, muscles tensing. Margot, sensing the simmering power beside her, stepped forward. "It is not boldness," she said, voice clear and unwavering. "It is justice." A gust of wind swept dust into the faces of the crowd. Koyan shifted slightly, the sunlight glinting off his bronze skin and highlighting the lean power of his body. He did not move aggressively, but the sheer presence radiating from him was enough. Even the sheriff, a man usually brimming with authority, paused, uncertainty flickering across his face. The confrontation escalated quickly. One of the greedy men lunged forward, hand outstretched to grab the satchel. Koyan reacted with the precision of a storm. In a single fluid movement, he stepped in front of Margot, body coiled and ready, eyes locked on the attacker. The man froze as Koyan's intensity washed over him. There was no cruelty, only undeniable power and command. Margot's pulse raced, but she felt grounded, as if Koyan's presence lent her courage she had long thought lost. She held the satchel tighter and met the man's gaze with newfound confidence. "Leave," she said, her voice steady, "or face the consequences." The crowd gasped. A tense silence fell over the square. One by one, the men backed away, muttering threats they did not dare act on, intimidated not just by Coyne's strength, but by Margot's newfound authority. The sheriff stepped forward, brow furrowed, but even he recognized the power shift. Once the square cleared, Margot exhaled, a mixture of relief and triumph washing over her. Coyne lowered his stance, his long hair plastered to his shoulders, sweat glistening on his bronzed chest. He did not speak, but the subtle nod he gave her spoke volumes. They had won not through brute force alone, but through strategy, courage, and unity. Margot glanced around at the town that had once mocked and underestimated her. "It's not over," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They'll try." Again, Coyne's eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers. "Then we will be ready, together." For the first time in months, Margot felt the fragile beginnings of peace settle into her chest. She had reclaimed control, not just of her property, but of her own life. And beside her, Coyne remained a silent guardian, a reminder that survival was not about facing the world alone, but about finding strength in unexpected alliances. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the town in gold and shadow, Margot realized that the danger was far from gone, but so was her fear. And, with Coyne by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The sun had barely risen, casting the first pale light over the canyon and the hidden valley. Margot Hollister stood at the edge of a ridge, the leather satchel of family deeds secured at her side. The events of the past day's cliffside peril, midnight raids, storms, and the tense town confrontation had left her exhausted, yet resolute. Beside her, Coyne's bare chest gleamed in the dawnlight, his long black hair tangled from wind and exertion, beads and feathers catching the first rays. He scanned the horizon, alert and unwavering, a guardian both formidable and steady. I thought I was powerless," Margot said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled, but there was a steel beneath it, forged from survival and struggle. "But now, I realize strength isn't just about muscles or weapons. It's about facing what you fear and not letting it define you." Coyne's dark eyes softened, a hint of pride flickering in their depths. He did not speak immediately, letting her words settle between them like the calm after a storm. Then he nodded slowly. "You have learned well," he said. "Strength tempered by awareness is far greater than brute force, and courage is your truest weapon." Margot exhaled, looking down at the valley below, the hidden spring glinting like a jewel amidst the canyon's red rocks. The place that had once been a refuge now felt like a symbol, danger and beauty intertwined, a test of both body and spirit. She thought of the townsfolk, the greedy men who had underestimated her, and of the countless times she had thought she would not survive. Yet here she was, standing at the edge, alive and unbroken. Coyne stepped closer, his presence commanding yet reassuring. He extended a hand, not just to guide her down the ridge, but as a gesture of solidarity. Margot took it, feeling the warmth and power in his grip, a connection that had grown through shared peril and unspoken understanding. Together, they descended into the hidden valley, moving with purpose and alertness. The terrain was still treacherous, but Margot's steps were confident, each one a testament to her growth. She no longer clung to fear. She embraced vigilance, knowing that preparation and trust were her greatest allies. As they reached the spring, Coyne paused and looked out toward the cliffs where the town lay in the distance. "The town is not yet free of corruption," he said, voice low but firm. "But you have reclaimed your power. That is the first step, The rest will follow with patience and wisdom." Margot nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I will not let them take what is mine," she said, her voice resolute. "Not my land, not my family's legacy, not my life." Koyen's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable but approving. Then, silently, he turned to the spring, crouched, and cupped his hands in the water. Margot watched him, mesmerized by the quiet ritual, the primal grace in his movements. When he looked back at her, droplets of water glinting on his bronze chest, she understood that strength, courage, and humanity could coexist in one being, and that he was a living testament to that truth. The morning stretched on, soft light, bathing the valley in warmth. Margot felt a sense of closure, not only for the immediate threats she had faced, but for the doubt and fear that had haunted her since her husband's death. She had survived the cliff, the storm, the town's treachery, and in doing so, she had discovered a resilience she had never known she possessed. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you, Koyen, for everything." He inclined his head slightly, a rare smile brushing his lips. "Do not thank me. Trust and courage are not owed, they are earned. And you have earned both." Margot looked out over the hidden valley. The canyon, the path that led back to her town, and beyond that, the uncertain future. For the first time, she felt not fear, but readiness. Whatever trials awaited, she would meet them not as a victim, but as a woman tempered by adversity, strengthened by experience, and guided by loyalty and trust. With Koyen at her side, she stepped forward, leaving the spring and the hidden valley behind, but carrying its lessons within her heart. The sun rose fully over the canyon, illuminating a new day, a new beginning, and the promise that she would never again be powerless.